Thank you.
I think the structure was kind of fun.
All right. Hi, everybody. Obviously, you're here for the Lunch and Learn with Jeremy. Jeremy's one of the inventors of XMPP. Is that correct?
Yep.
The Java protocol, and then also he's working now with a company called Singly. They're based out of the Valley, but Jeremy is one of our native Iowans here, and he actually is splitting time between Cascade and the Valley, similar to what I do, and a few about the rest of us, kind of taking that connection from the coast and bringing it back here to Iowa, and he's going to talk all about Singly and whatever sundry other topics he'd like to discuss. I actually am not going to be joining you because I have to go work on stuff for Startup Weekend, so enjoy. Your food smells good. See you guys later.
Is there direct flights from here to San Francisco?
I've never found one.
Okay. I was wondering. I didn't think so.
Through God knows where. I mean, I'll end up going to like Charlotte to go back to.
I've driven to Omaha.
Just because it's better?
To drive to go to San Francisco before.
Well, Southwest started flying now, so we might be getting lucky soon. So I'm hoping.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Have a good lunch.
Yeah. All right. Lunch and Learn. Only a few people eating lunch. So it's going to be pretty casual today because I feel like I don't know where all you guys are coming from. A lot of you guys are involved in startups. And I have a really diverse set of backgrounds in lots of areas. So I'd love to be as helpful as possible around anything specific that people have, instead of just standing up here and talking about everything. I'll give a 10-minute background on my history to sort of give some context of where to ask questions. But really, questions anything from like either odd things in internet history all the way through actual protocols and technology stacks and databases, and I'll help you optimize SQL queries if you want. All the way to like larger architecture, load balancing, to startup lifestyle, to culture, fundraising, dealing with investors, being on boards, being an advisor, all of that stuff. The whole, I guess saying all that, that's a lot. Maybe I've not been very focused over my career. I just think being a person who likes to create things, you just follow the passion wherever it goes, and it takes you to a lot of different places over time. So a quick little 10 minutes on my history, and I'm going to go through this probably in more detail, but with less color than I ever have before. I remember meeting my first computer in 4th grade. I remember the classroom. I remember the closet that they had it in. And they had 2 Macs, the old like brown colored, or the Apple IIs. Yeah, the 2Es, yep. The floppy, big old floppy disks. I remember playing the games on them. And I remember even in 4th grade discovering that there was a command line. And they had this booklet of commands that you could do. And you could actually create files and put commands in the files. And then you could run those files and it would do more things that you told it to. And I remember that sort of discovery, the interaction with this device. And it sort of set my direction, from then on. And being in Cascade, Iowa, I met that my 4th grade was in the late 80s. So, those computers were already like hand-me-downs at that point. So I was a little bit behind the curve. By the time I got to junior high, I was able to write basic games, games in BASIC, and figured out that there was a high-res mode that you could do stuff in, and I was playing with colors and stuff. I remember writing a virus, which I thought was really cool. It could only travel via floppies, so somebody put a floppy in, it would copy itself onto the floppy, and they put the floppy in another machine, it would load up and sit there resident until you restarted the machine. So it didn't really travel anywhere. But then I discovered BBSs in the early 90s. And that was now all of a sudden this little world that I had in these little games, I could talk to other people. And at the same time, I became an avid reader of like popular science and just sort of all these ideas about the future. And, back then it was like flying cars and anti-gravity and all this cool stuff that was going to happen. But I was more fascinated with, I remember even in, I guess I was a freshman in high school at the point, but I remember thinking about the fact that this computer connected to other computers has a lot of information on it, you can write a program that does a bunch of stuff with this information, and it can like help you make decisions, and it can help you tell you things. And I thought someday, I'm like, someday it's just, you can just talk to it, and it'll just tell you what to do and where to go. And I actually use Siri, on the way here. I'm like, hey, call Dennis, as I was walking over, and like, gave me the addresses to the location here. So it's so cool to see that some of the dreams I had actually happening in my lifetime. And the Star Trek and Doctor Who that I watched in the day, it's like this tech is way beyond what they were imagining back then. So I decided I had wanted to go to college to do, I thought the coolest thing to do would be computer engineering, like designing chips, which is definitely not the coolest thing to do. But back then in the early 90s, it seemed like a really, that's like the heart of the machine, the chip design. So I went to Iowa State for a year. I was trying to do a double major, computer science, computer engineering, and I was doing well in school, but I didn't feel good. I didn't like it, and the internet was happening. I remember they had Vincent was a machine down there. I don't know who's, At Iowa State. At Iowa State, yeah. I remember my first experiences with X Windows and the network machine and network programs, and it was really hard to wrap my head around the fact that I wasn't interacting with the computer in front of me anymore. There's a big computer somewhere else. It was actually under the floor. I got to go see later on. And it was connected with all the other computers on the campus. And I also remember running Netscape, running Mosaic for the first time. And it popping up in the little logo and going through the web pages, the basic images and links, and it was profound. Like it was really amazing to feel that experience of all this content and being able to get through it. It was so different than at the time. So prevalent was like CD-ROM based games and systems and knowledge. You have to put in a CD and you have to load it to get all the rich content. So I got sucked into that world really, really quickly. I wanted to understand how it worked. I learned about HTTP. I learned about the web servers. Learned a lot of HTML. And I was way outpaced from college at that time, the stuff that they were teaching. And I just lost complete interest in it. Dropped out of college, started working for an ISP, became the webmaster. I got very fortunate. I moved back home to started working for an ISP in Dubuque. One of the friends of the ISP was like very forward thinking. He had registered Windows95.com in 1994 before Microsoft realized that they were going to name everything by year back then. So, and they had trademarked it with a space, and he fought them on it because he had the domain without the space, because he couldn't have spaces and domains. So he was able to keep the domain, and it was a shareware site. So I became the webmaster for that site. And I got sort of the really intense version of what it's like to run a big website back then. And it was running on a single P75, single CPU, obviously, P75 with 32 megs of RAM, running Apache. And I had to learn all about Apache because it was a bunch of patches back in 1995. It wasn't much of a real web server. I had to get to learn C and sort of the guts of how all that worked. We were doing millions of hits a day, which is, nobody knows, but it's probably one of the biggest websites on the internet because Windows 95 was launching and everybody's going to Windows95.com to download all the software and shareware that you needed. So that was really intense. I still think it's amazing. On a P75 with 32 megs of RAM, you can serve millions of hits a day, and many of the pages were dynamic. So I got a very deep lesson in how much the protocols, the capabilities of the protocols sort of shape the experience, and it reaching a big scale and affecting a lot of people. Like one little change somewhere can affect a lot of people very, very quickly. Protocols became a big passion of mine. I followed the development of HTML very closely. I was way into JavaScript as soon as Netscape had their first alpha. I thought that was the coolest stuff. I learned JavaScript right away. XML was developing at the same time. I was on the XML mailing list. I wrote I believe it's the third XML parser ever, and it was written in JavaScript because it was very, very early on. And I started to see, I was so hippie, I guess. My parents were hippies, so I was really hippie about like the structure of the internet and that it frees people and applications to talk to each other without anybody controlling that. And then I saw instant messaging start up, and it was just, it was all ICQ and all AOL and then Microsoft and Yahoo, and they were controlling it all and they were limiting what you can do, and there's no open system to do this stuff. So I'm like, this is bullshit. We've got this really cool XML thing going on over here, and this is a broken thing happening in the internet where people are using it to communicate. So I'm like, all right, let's just see if we can do something. Let's use XML. Let's try and solve this problem. Let's create an open system that's actually distributed, the same principles as like email. Started Jabber. That did really well. In the meantime, as I was doing that, like I was involved. I was a webmaster for a bunch of different websites. There's another little startup in Dubuque, an actual startup in 1998 doing. It was called the National Plan Room Network, and we were trying to bring like the construction plans online for construction people, and we were way too far ahead. But it was like everything was moving onto the web, and web browsers were like, all right, let's move like all the construction industry onto the web, and like that still hasn't happened. But I learned a lot. Like it was just a couple of us, and I learned a lot about like the real startup life. We rose and fell in about 8 months, and sort of out of the ashes of that, I took a job at McGraw-Hill at the time. Started to experience what corporate life was like, and it wasn't that great. On the side, I was working on Jabber and developing that, and sort of launched it to the world in '99. It grew, it took off. There was a company in Denver called Web Interactive that wanted to build a whole bunch of stuff on top of Jabber, so they hired me. They bought this other company that had done a bunch of BBS stuff, and a couple of the people at that company were going to leave, and they're like, wait a second, this Jabber thing's really cool. Why don't we make a new like subsidiary, and like you guys take Jeremie and you guys make Jabber, a company in its own. So Jabber Inc. was formed. There was so many enterprises and ISPs around the world were trying to use it, so they worked with all those companies to sort of commercialize it, integrate it with their systems. Cisco ended up buying them 5-6 years ago, and they're still thriving sort of inside Cisco. It's getting baked into most of Cisco's products, and it's actually, I just heard this week that Cisco's rolling out how to dynamically manage all the routers like through an API, and it's all through Jabber. So it's kind of fun that now all of these routers controlling the internet are now also themselves going to be controlled through XMPP. Hopefully there's no security flaws there. I just realized that could be a problem. Well, the government actually adopted Jabber very widely too. It won somehow. The XML was a little bit verbose, but somehow it won the contract, like in a competition for the protocol that they use to talk to subs, which is a very limited amount of bandwidth, but XMPP ended up being the best against all the trade-offs. So it's actually now the standard within a lot of military networks. So it should be secure then, I hope. It's a pretty simple system. It's also like a lot of commercial HVAC systems use it to control, like for all the management of them. So a lot of buildings around the world are being controlled by it. And then obviously it's baked into so many different things. Google and Facebook have it baked into most of their stuff. Apple has had it baked in. It used to be the push notification system for all the iPhones until like I think iOS 4 or something, where they just went binary with all their stuff. So yeah, it's sort of everywhere. I ended up between like 2004, 2005, I ended up getting pulled in a lot of different directions, doing a lot of consulting, a lot of architecture. I worked with Jimmy Wales on a search project for a couple of years. So I've a lot of diversity. And over those last couple of years, one of the startups I worked on in 2010 was trying to deal with all the social data around people and trying to aggregate it and build a good experience on top of it. So I got the little light bulb went off in my head again. I'm like, wait a second, I'm familiar with this pattern. Like, there's this data that exists in all these different places, and it's all different, and there's no real system, there's no real way to work with it all. And so I'm like, well, this is a pattern I've seen before. It's a problem I've tried to solve before. So we started Singly, myself and 2 other people who were working in the same problem. And we've been trying to tackle it over the last 2 years. We started with the Locker project, which was, as far as startup life goes, it was a very noble idea to start with, but not the most practical and correct one. So we spent the first year sort of struggling and trying to figure out how to make that work. And I wouldn't say we pivoted, but we really refocused what we did earlier this year to be like, we're solving a real problem, but we're not reaching the people who are experiencing that problem. And those are the developers, the people building applications. And so we really refocused on like, how do we reach them? How do we build the tools to make their life easier so that they can make great experiences for people? So I think that's the big rant. I'd love to, like I said, I really wanted this to be a little bit more Q&A and like answering questions about any of that history, but definitely specifics. I love to help startups. I love to solve problems, give advice. It's just, I'm a developer, so I'm full of opinions. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in any of them, but I have lots of opinions to share. So ask away.
How is like being involved in the forefront of the development of all of these things like JavaScript and all these protocols influence how you view them versus someone like me who might be going in and learning JavaScript later?
Quick little bit of story on JavaScript. I thought it was a beautiful language when I first saw it. I thought it was going to be a big language, and it turned out to be, baked into the web. It turned out to be a big one, but it also had the DOM, which was this huge, awful wart that, I think held JavaScript down. I created mod JavaScript for Apache back in '99, I think, and it couldn't take off because the server-side VMs for JavaScript were not good back in the day, so it just wasn't useful. But now we have Node.js, and thanks to Google, we have V8, which is a really powerful engine for that. I think JavaScript is probably going to be the dominant language, server and client side. Looking 10 years out, I think it's going to displace Java and even Ruby, in Java, especially in the enterprise space. So I think it's definitely the best language. It's evolved pretty nicely, too. The cool thing about JavaScript is that you can start from scratch right now and be an expert. And a lot of other languages, if you start from scratch, you'll never, ever be able to catch up to the people who've been doing it for 10 years. And really, in JavaScript, I think in a month or two, you can be almost at the expert level. Because the language is very accessible, and all of the fringe pieces of it, the experts don't even use. Whereas you get into some Perl or Ruby, and you see some code, it just doesn't make any sense, but that's the best way to do it. JavaScript's not that way. It's very accessible. It's very sort of fun and lightweight, and it doesn't take long. So it's a great thing to do. Whereas Unix isn't that way. You meet an old Unix person and they can crush anybody that starts out in that platform. Yeah.
So how does spending your time 50-50 between San Francisco and Iowa work? Do you have a place there?
Good question. I didn't even talk about that. Singly, when we founded it, 3 people. I was in Iowa, 1 was in New York, and 1 was in San Francisco, and we had to make a decision where to be. Iowa wasn't really a choice. We decided to go to San Francisco just for we had thought it would be for the other developers, sort of the talent pool available, which was wrong. That's actually not the reason you'd want to be in San Francisco. A good reason to be there is that the community is very alive, that you can go to events and you can sort of network with so many other startups and so many other people every day, anytime. It's as well as a lot of the there's a lot of sort of verticals of expertise there too. Like if you're way into quantified self, there's tons of those people there. If you're way into photos, there's lots of like photo-based startups and photo tech people there, or gaming or robotics. So it's a hotbed of people to network with, but it's not a great place to hire developers. I think it's because developers out there, they have their pick of the litter. You know, they can go anywhere and they get paid a lot. So they don't have, if you hire a developer from there, they don't have a lot of like, if you piss them off, you know, they can just leave. it doesn't bother them. So the splitting the time between Iowa, I wasn't about to move my family out there. I've always been sort of committed to raising my kids in Iowa and not wanting to displace them. But the Midwest values have always been very important, and I have a lot of family there. I guess since I've been traveling a lot over the last 10 to 15 years, I learned to never leave for more than 3 days. The 3 days is about the maximum of like before your kids would start to forget you. Basically, like that you sort of you lose touch with the everyday life after 3 days. So like 4 to 5 days, you basically lost a week. And especially when kids are young, it's just way too far. Too much happens in that amount of time. 3 days is just about enough. You know, it's like about the same as somebody being sick, you know, in a bedroom for a couple of days. So it's been about my limit. But which means the commute to San Francisco is, you know, I've been able to get it down to about 9 hours, maybe 8 on a good day. So, you know, that's 16 hours buffered on the ends of like basically 2 days there in order to get a 3-day window of being gone. We have the office out there has lofts in it. That was like one of the reasons we got it. So it's got like, it was an apartment. The building is a co-work live space. So I basically live in the office out there when I'm out there, and as have other people as they travel. I use FaceTime a lot. I use Minecraft a lot. My youngest is now 9, but he's been sort of texting for the last couple of years, so he has no problem texting stuff or when he gets home from school to talk to him. So the connectivity has been really good, like video and gaming and all that. So it's been it's worked out.
What things do you think you specifically need to be there for? Like, what do you do with your time when you're on site? Same stuff as you do here?
Sometimes it's the same stuff, but usually when I'm there doing the same stuff I would do at home, I'm usually sitting in a corner with my headphones on, right? There's no point I don't need to be there for that. So sometimes I try to focus. It's been very episodic. It's been different. Every startup has different life cycles to it. Sometimes I'm like doing a lot of networking, talking to other startups, especially with what Singly is doing, and like learning about what we can do and how to work and how to help developers. So sometimes I spend a week, when I'm a week at home, I like schedule way too many meetings into those 2 days, and it's almost back-to-back meetings and like traveling around San Francisco and talking to people, or them showing up at the office or going out, all the way until like midnight. You know, it's from 8 a.m. till midnight solid. So sometimes it's completely packed with that. Sometimes it's team meetings. It's like us figuring out, doing some planning, doing some development, debugging things. So it's usually, when I go out there, I try to spend the time face-to-face with other people, not to just go out there and sit there and work.
Yeah.
Just kind of follow on that, just in terms of team time, debugging, product planning. Have you found that whatever, you know, Google Hangouts or some kind of
Hangouts. Yep.
Is that, what do you miss if you're not there when you're trying to whiteboard and trying to put sticky notes up, whatever it is?
What you miss by not being there is the sort of the office camaraderie sort of thing that happens, the water cooler talk. So you miss some of the personal connections. And you can do a lot over Google Hangout, but you have to be intentional about it. Like you have to like hop on a Hangout with somebody and just sit there and bullshit, not like it be a meeting, and catch up with them or with a group of people. We have the Hangout, like we have a camera up on the wall. We're on a table where everybody eats lunch. We often join and like just sit there and bullshit over lunch with people. We're about half distributed and half in San Francisco right now, and we're leaning more towards being more and more distributed over time. So there'll be, we need to sort of shift our communication styles within Singly to, I don't want to say reduce some of that camaraderie that happens person to person, but extend that out to make sure everybody can participate in it.
I have kind of a fun question. Do your hippie parents even understand what you do for a living? I mean, like, how do you bridge that gap? Because I just graduated and I work for a startup, and a lot of my friends, they're not really hippies, but they have no idea what I'm doing.
My parents don't know, no. It took them, I think, a couple of years before they even understood what Jabber was, and I don't even know if they really got it yet then. And even though they've used it, at numerous points, it still didn't totally click to them. I think they sort of get what Singly does, but only in the fact that I can open up an app and show them, like, when you do this stuff in the app, we're actually helping make that happen and make that possible. But so they don't really understand the mechanics behind it. I've tried. I don't know how to explain it to them. It's tough. Other than just giving some real world examples and hoping, like, no, I don't work for Google. Like, just because I'm doing internet stuff doesn't mean I work for Google or Apple.
How do you go from like a side project? So, Jabber, I assume, started as something you kind of worked on the side, right? Singly with the Locker project was kind of that way.
Mm-hmm.
What's that transition been like for you from something you're just working on for fun to deciding this is actually, a company, this is something I want to work on?
It is, you're working on it for fun. It gets to the point where it's so much fun that you take a sick day or two. And then you start to really question, if you want to go back to work, or you take a vacation and all you do is you work on your fun project. And then I think it's a combination of luck, that you just get lucky, like sharing your excitement and your passion, that you find some other people, and maybe you find a way to actually still be able to buy gas and food while working on that fun thing. As well as when you get so sucked into it, like you get pretty desperate and you just have to find that way. You have to, find some way to fund your passion there, and you convince yourself that, like, this is the reason to be alive. So the transition is really hard and it's really delusional. And a lot of times you come out the other side of it and it didn't work, and you can't let that burnout sort of be the end of it either, because it does work someday, and it is worth it always. I think that creative spirit needs to be fostered, even if it does get, stepped on once in a while. So I don't know what else to say as far as what it's like. I've been through it in both ways a couple of times, and it's tough.
Did you bootstrap the startup Singly? I mean, was it you and a couple guys for a long time before you took on some money, or?
I've been working on, my side project was called Telehash, and I've been working on that on the side for about a year, and it was getting to the point I was getting pretty feverish about it. The startup that was doing all the data tech was sort of crumbling, and I started doing some consulting again on the side. I was using the consulting to, like, make enough money so that I could work on the other stuff. So Singly, it was more on the luck side, actually, that Singly happened. That my co-founder had a relationship with Venrock. He was sort of an entrepreneur in residence there, and he's like, what you're doing is really cool, your side project is really cool, you should go talk to one of the Venrock guys. And in about 10 minutes, it only took 10 minutes, him describing what it was. He's actually he's a VC, but he's actually a programmer as well, and he still does some Python. So he totally got it right away, and he's, within 15 minutes, he's like, all right, I've heard enough. You guys figure out a business plan, you figure out whatever you need, put the team together and make it happen. So we got lucky in that one. I found the right person, he had the right connection. Networking is a huge part of it too.
Do you think your name, I mean, the Jabber side, and who are the other? One is Ubuntu. I mean, did you get some name recognition, some street cred when you walked in there for being who you are?
I think so, but honestly, VCs and angel investors don't give much credence to that. They will measure you like based on, they don't really measure you based on the merit of the idea that much. They measure you based on your passion in the idea and how much you're going to follow through with it. Many people who do have a name, will just try and do another idea and they don't have the passion behind it, so it doesn't matter. And many people who don't have a name, if they're very passionate about it, that passion is what will take it. And you need to have a relatively balanced team. They like to look at the team to make sure it's not 2 tech people or 2 business people. Those usually don't work out. You need to have like a tech and a business person. So we got lucky that way too. Yeah.
Have you guys gotten like patent trolled yet? And were there patents involved in Jabber?
Oh, Jabber, yes. Landmines of patents in Jabber. The reason that Jabber doesn't do voice and video at all is because Jabber Inc. was afraid of the patent mines out there and the threats that if we started to do any voice and video, even though we're open source, it's like they were still going to attack the company, even though it was an open source project. Singly, we've been very fortunate. We haven't encountered anything like that. I suspect there's some out there. It's like you're better off not to know and not to look. So I've not gone looking, but I'm sure there are lots of landmine patents in that space. There's a couple of years ago, sort of in the startup world, a lot of the worry was that, looking 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, that every startup is going to have a lawyer on the team just to survive. That hasn't totally happened, but it has to some degree. Like you need to have a good law firm at least. And the patent threats as well as like other threats are creeping earlier and earlier into the stage of a life cycle of a company.
Have you filed your own patents?
No. I have my name in some patents in the past. Patents are tough. So timing, right now, the Foundry Group, one of our investors, Jason Mendelson, is at the patent conference, like within the government, where they're trying to figure out, they have all the academics and all the experts right now, like this very minute, they're all meeting and talking and trying to figure out how to fix the patent system. And they can't get rid of it. Everybody says just get rid of it. You can't get rid of it. It's like, it's part of the foundation of the US. You can't get rid of it, but you can fix it. So I'm very lucky that we're very close to him and he's there representing, the Foundry Group, and they're very innovative in how they think about this stuff. I think it's going to get fixed. It's going to take some time. And it shouldn't be that big looming threat that everybody thought it was going to be for startups and innovators, especially in the software space.
How do you, be with your name, obviously, how do you approach consulting when you need to do it, or when you've talked a little bit about you've done some consulting on site. How do you approach that when you're who you are?
The consulting?
Yeah, like how
do I approach it?
Do people come to you, or how
Some of it's been people have come to me. Honestly, it's been word of mouth. And a lot of the consulting I've done, they have no idea or they don't care about who I am.
Right.
It's just been that they have a particular problem that I happen to have a lot of knowledge around. Mm-hmm. And, once I can tell them, like, well, this is how I can help you solve the problem, they're like, okay, great, let's do it. Software, there's so many pockets in this world. Like, some of you guys probably know you have a lot of diverse backgrounds. It's so many pockets in this world that are so far behind in software and networking that it still feels like maybe 5 to 10% of the world has really been affected by it, and the rest of the stack is like 15 years behind. So there's a lot of ways. A lot of the consulting has been word of mouth, somebody seeing this big problem and knowing that there's a simple solution for, instead of that company spending $5 million trying to pay big IBM or whatever big name consultants to solve it, that it's like $10,000 and 2 weeks of work.
Right.
And those gaps exist all the time, everywhere. But it's just through recommendations that those happen usually. So I have some questions for you guys. Like, how many of you guys are, we're all here, but how many of you guys are actually doing a startup right now? Like that's paying your day-to-day life? A few of you, 3, 4, half of you. What is your biggest pain? Like what sucks every day?
Big companies. We have lots of that, so that's why I'm interested in San Francisco, is because all of our our pain points are like dealing with Facebook and Google day to day, and we're such a small company that it doesn't really matter to that. Like our business doesn't mean a lot to them, but the relationship the way, like especially Facebook, we're on a Facebook application, but we have no input over like what their terms of service and all that stuff is, and we have no relationships with them.
Yeah, and the hard part there is that those things usually only get solved through actual relationships.
Yeah.
It's like you can't go through the normal channels. You have to know somebody at Facebook, and you have to they have to really care about you in order to like fix that problem internally. It's just humans, we keep creating these sort of like old school power networks, and it's still happening. And it's probably especially tough being out here and not having that, you can't just walk up to the, most of the Facebook employees are out there. You can't just like go meet them at any point and get to know them. Is there like anything particular with being in Iowa? Like what's the hardest part about being here? Because I'm curious. Like I was pretty surprised, I think, Iowa to hear about how many startups were out here. My blinders were down on my own startup for the last couple of years, and it's really exciting. But like what's going to help this area? What's going to help startups thrive?
Well, I think it might be like, and Luala and other startups around here are proving it wrong, but just other companies that exist in this area working with you, or like trusting a startup with a certain project or something. Because, they might be more used to it in other communities, but here it's kind of like, oh, what do they do? And how are they an expert in that field? How can we trust that they deal with you?
And so some of the sort of national attention or worldwide attention to, some of it seems a little overblown or exaggerated, but like glorifying what a startup is might almost bring some reputation to it, saying that it's a cool thing, it's a good thing. Some of those are really old school networks too. Getting those people to sort of trust the young kids to
And the example you gave was perfect, like paying IBM $5 million to come solve your $10,000 problem. But if a startup came to you and said, oh no, we can solve this in 2 months worth of work, they're going to be like, the value of the two, they're going to be like, oh no, that doesn't work.
Yeah, they immediately discard it.
Yeah.
And usually where it does work is when it's somebody inside the company that already trusts it, or it trusts the referral of somebody else. So it's that networking that has worked. Interesting.
In the long run, I think it is going to go down to end up being money and venture capital, which is very sparse. And we've got some really good people working on it. But in any system, including, and we've been able to do a lot with our resources, but in any system, including, especially San Francisco, it's people who are successful going and then reinvesting in the community. There's a lot of that happening casually as far as the people helping out, but in the end, I think it is going to end up being a money show this year.
There's talked to that a little bit. My co-founder was over in Europe for 2 weeks, and he's at a conference where there's lots of representatives from all over the world in other countries. This entrepreneurial spirit and developing and creating apps and solving problems and creating little companies around it is sort of, as much as it's happening here, it's actually happening all over the world. And a lot of people haven't really recognized that movement that's happening. And it's the funding has changed, I think, a little bit too, in that there's more and more angel and seed funding because everybody's getting afraid of putting, the people who have a lot of wealth, individuals that have a lot of wealth are getting afraid of putting it into stable markets. So they're taking pieces of it out and they're putting it into more risky things that are going into basically startups. They're funding people, they're funding ideas. And they feel good about it too, right? Like solving real problems for real people and applications, and they can try them and use them.
And I should note that personally I'm against fundraising until you obviously need it, but I do think it's for the long-term development of the ecosystem, that's the other big factor.
The hard part is there's now a gap between like getting some of that seed funding and angel funding, and then like getting to like the Series A or Series B that you might need. And oftentimes a startup is defined by growth. Like if you're not growing, you're not really a startup. And you usually want to, when something is growing, as much as it sucks to take investment from people, it's usually the best to be spending more ahead of where you're growing. Otherwise, the friction is hard. If you're only spending what you have to grow, the friction is much harder. And it just will slow you down, period. So if you can grow, the faster you can grow, you're usually spending ahead of where you're making money. And so you need investment all the way through. I've been through so many different patterns. I'm usually an advocate of like bootstrapping yourself as much as you can.
In the beginning where I come from, but I know the pattern of this ecosystem is that it ends up being that you have to have some success, but that it can be reinvested in the community.
Yep.
You have that happening on the capital levels again, just in support and mentorship and things like that, which is huge. I think we see that here more than I think we do other places, but you have to think about long-term viability.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the next 5 years play out. There's a lot of rumors that there will be a real worldwide shift sort of away from the stock market system, and a real structured system will form around like actual funding startups and entrepreneurs and developers worldwide. That you'll be investing in people instead of in stock symbols. So we'll see.
I think the flip side of that is that there's only certain types of businesses that you start like bootstrapped, and I feel like around here people are very focused on companies that will make money from day one, rather than potentially looking at like a longer term picture of we could create this multi-billion-dollar company someday. It's a real focus on let's create a $10 million company next year, rather than scaling up really quickly and those sorts of things.
Yeah, but I mean, is that a good focus?
I don't know.
I think these, I don't want to call them boutique companies, but a $10 million company, is giving a lot of people a really great lifestyle, doing something they're passionate about and they love.
Right. But it's not going to be a huge win. I think one of the things that we've lacked here is a huge, Iowa company that, has gone on to be like a big win. We haven't had like an Iowa like Groupon or an Iowa Facebook or something like that. I don't know. I tend to get more excited about like Duala, who's obviously shooting, aiming for the fences and trying to solve a real problem in the world and build this really important thing than something that is a lot more niche. I mean, they both have their place, but I think we don't have like our bedrocks of those couple big startups that you can look to and say, look how much of success there were.
Right. And then in those environments, generally when those companies are successful, they do actually reinvest in the community, the founders or whoever. When they exit, they do spend money and start venture capitals or whatever. So.
Yeah, this is funny. My goals with Singly, I never want to exit. We have no plans on exiting. It's like that's not why we built this. We built it to help provide infrastructure and support for other apps, and to foster a worldwide ecosystem of development.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what would be your ultimate vision of like what would make Singly a success?
I can, and I have a book recommendation for you that's been sort of a foundation of what our belief in Singly and what we're doing, and it's the I always forget the title because it's a really long title. So it is about Visa and Dee Hock, the founder of Visa. The story of how Visa started. Dee Hock. Visa. So the one from many, because the book was published twice. He updated it like 5 years later with the new edition, and that's the better one. One from many. It was called The Birth of the Chaotic Age, but now it's one from many, Visa, the Rise of the Chaotic Organization. And he has this concept of chaord, which is like chaos and order, like the balance between chaos and order. That most organizations are ordered, like your typical Fortune 500 company is very ordered. And in most, there's a lot of, nature is like almost pure chaos, but there's a lot of order within it too. There's a balance. And he thinks the more organizations can emulate that balance and have chaos and order work together cooperatively, the more successful they'll be for society, more sustainable they'll be for people. That most corporations are not sustainable in the long run, how they're structured. The story and the history of Visa is something I think everybody within Singly is aspiring to. in that Visa was the first, the credit card system before Visa was a disaster. It was incredibly hard for, I mean, I can only know it secondhand, but it was incredibly hard for merchants. They had to work with all the banks individually. You had a credit card that was with your bank alone. So a merchant had to support all the different banks, and a person would have to have different credit cards with different banks depending on where they wanted to use them. And like the actual systems behind it, you know, sometimes it took months to actually resolve the money. And it was so inefficient for everybody. If you look at and that was for electronic transactions. I mean, they created electronic transactions worldwide, Visa did. They actually helped create their competitor, MasterCard, because they didn't want to become the only player. They wanted there to be competition. The only way to actually survive in the long run is competition. So they fostered all of that. I see a very, very similar pattern that the merchant nowadays is the developer, and they need to talk to, and it's not money, it's data around a person that's transferring. That the developer has to integrate with Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and Google Apps and all these different banks, essentially. And it's custom, and it's hard, and it's different, and it changes over time. And we're really trying to create that system where they just have to there's one common simple way to do it, and how to do those interactions, and how to move data, and that the person can come to the merchant and have a trusted transaction with their data, the merchant being the application, so that they can trust when they bring in their friends and bring in their data, their contacts, their photos, whatever, that they know that it's going to move in and it can move out, that it becomes more of a person's ability to move the stuff around to applications. And the developers aren't saying, we only work with these 2 banks. You know, the developers say, whatever bank, I don't care. Bring whatever bank, whatever data you have, wherever it is. So that's our long-term vision, is to really create that fabric for applications to talk to each other efficiently. It's a great book too. I mean, it's full of stories, and it's a little weird at times. It's one of those unknown books that, you know, is really a gem to go through. Like, where did this, you know, how come everybody doesn't know about this guy?
You see kind of, not really necessarily about vision, but your comment about dependency on Facebook, and I know, outages at Amazon that take down, Foursquare and Netflix. Do you yourself see concern over depending on either another product like Facebook or Twitter, or dependency on commoditized hardware, putting your stuff at Amazon, and then you don't control it all, obviously. Super cheap, super convenient, I love all those things, but does that give you pause? Not maybe for Singly, but just in general for startups.
The dependency on single providers gives me pause. I think the diversity is really the key there. And when diversity is difficult and you have to make a choice, because especially startups are very resource constrained, you have to make a choice, and you can't always sort of diversify, so you choose just one or two. And I think it's very dangerous if there's only a few. Like in the Facebook example, that's like one of the reasons Singly exists, is so that you have that diversity. So you don't have to depend on just one. You can make the choice to let a person talk to any of them or bring any of them. On the cloud provider side, I think it is definitely scary to just depend on Amazon for so much stuff. And I think it's going to change over time. I mean, Google's trying, they're not doing very good at it. Microsoft's making a really big push with Azure to actually build a real competitor to Amazon. I can't believe IBM hasn't done it. There's a lot of smaller companies that do a really good job. We run a bunch of our stuff on Joyent. They've been wonderful. We also have some of our own hardware that we have backups and stuff going to. So as much as you can, the barrier to move your stuff from Amazon to Joyent is pretty high, but I think over time, it'll be easier to diversify. I hope. I want to help try as much as I can to make that easier to diversify.
Cool.
By the way, if you guys are putting hardware anywhere, if you're buying hardware anywhere, one of my good friends has a data center in Iowa. It's an old bunker. It's over between Monticello and Cascade. So it's one of the old government Cold War. It was actually a data center for the cable that ran across the U.S. All right, really quick story. The government thought that in the event of a nuclear war, the country that could communicate the soonest or the best after the war would survive. So they built a cable system across the United States that was supposed to be nuclear proof, nuclear bomb proof. What's that?
Does it still exist?
The cable's still on the ground, but it's broken into pieces everywhere. But it's still on the ground. You can still see some little rusty old orange signs and stuff. I don't even know if it's all marked everywhere. But it runs right across Iowa. It runs, I think, like north of Des Moines here, 50 miles or something. But the cable's this big, and it's mostly copper. But the signals back then, in the 60s, they had to pull the cable apart every 500 miles into basically a data center and recondition the signal and repower it and send it back out the other side. And those little data centers had to be designed to be able to take a direct hit. So they're all underground. By spec, there's more rebar, before they pour the concrete, enough rebar you couldn't see sunlight through it. So it's like 5 to 10 feet thick of metal and concrete, all buried. It's about the size of a small auditorium. So there's a data center now out in eastern Iowa. A friend of mine built a data center into it.
How do you cool that?
He has an actual geofield that does most of the cooling. So he circulates it through. He has backup systems also in case. But a geofield is like the most stable way that if anything broke. Because he wants to be disaster proof. That's his whole. It had generators inside of it and underground fuel tanks. So it could run for 2 weeks sealed.
Are you guys familiar with Trello? Probably a lot of you guys may know that. They hosted in New York, and then their data center got hammered a couple weeks ago with Sandy, and they ran out of diesel fuel. And they were kind of logging how they were pushing their hosting to Amazon Web Services and how it was going and how it wasn't. There's an interesting study on disaster recovery.
Yeah, Jerry tries to be disaster proof. He says his data center is disaster proof. He has fiber going out both sides, different directions, different telcos. He has a generator inside as well. Unless there's either a volcano or a meteor. It's the only thing that can take it out, he says. Yeah.
So being in the valley is cool because you get to see really good, really interesting ideas early. You also get to see really shitty ideas early. So I guess my question would be, what other companies have you seen or ideas have you seen recently that you're kind of fired up about?
Oh boy, there's patterns that I'm really excited about, and there's companies that are doing pretty well with those patterns. So, I met with Goodsmiths this morning, and I really love what they're doing, and I think if they can take a lot of that into the mobile space and really connect and make it more social, that they'll be big and amazing. They could be one of the triumph stories of Iowa in the next 2 years. I think, since all of my lens on this is that I think these things are communication tools. And like the talk that I gave yesterday was about how all these different apps give us new ways to communicate and share our lives with each other. So I'm very focused on the apps that are more powerful and the patterns. I think apps that let you bring your friends in, like let you invite friends in and give you sort of a feed view of whatever it is unique to that space. I think that opportunity to have that feed of what other people are doing and what you're doing and share things out, I think that pattern exists in so many, different verticals in so many different ways. And different, Google has this concept of circles, which is a neat concept, but I think every single app is its own circle. And the more and more apps that will find their ways into our passions in our life and things we want to share, will just, I think it's just the beginning of the possibilities there. Like there's one little app called Farm Stand that is just about going to farmers markets and networking with your friends who like to go to farmers markets and the people that are selling stuff at farmers markets. And I think everywhere that pattern exists, and they're following that same thing. Invite your friends in, have a feed view of different farmers markets coming up and who's going to which ones and what vendors you want to see are going to be there and what they have, that kind of stuff.
Do you think those are too niche? Or do you think those needs are so niche that they can't get the network effects that they need to have it be valuable? Or
I don't think so. I think the niche is where it's at. I think that's where that company might never be bigger than 5 or 10 people, but they're solving, I mean, they're making a lot of people really happy that are passionate about that stuff. And they'll have, you know, their livelihoods, you know, are taken care of through that. So I think that's what excites me.
Probably good defense too. If you're in a business that maybe will never grow beyond 5 or 10, you know a whole lot of attraction of competition. I suppose unless somebody really thinks they need a better app than your what you call a farm stand, but it can be a comfortable space, I guess.
Yep. And there's, I think there's a lot of, I mean, speaking to my Iowa roots and growing up on a farm, I think there's so many opportunities on the tech with farm. I mean, farmers are quickly adopting tech. I worry about the corporate farms taking over and, you know, uprooting all of the individual and family farms. But in the same way that the tech can empower the developers to create things, I think it can empower the farmers to get ahead of the corporations. I think the tech and the adoption of tech can accelerate them and make them smarter and better and faster than any corporation can move.
And there are more ways to do that.
What's that?
And there are more ways to do that. It's easier for them to develop
The newer generation of farmers are, yes. I think the older ones it's been hard for them to adopt a lot of the GPS and the new tractors and stuff. I've
like the big corporate farms, it's easier for them to try something new, and if it doesn't work, then this doesn't work, and if it does work.
Well, they like to do stuff at scale. Like they want to do something at scale, and oftentimes an individual farmer can find, like, if they treat a field in different ways and different times and different amounts, that they can get much more efficiency out of it and do better than a corporate farm. Especially where it's hilly. Like, you see corporate farms take over where it's flat, but where it's hilly, an individual farmer can do a lot better because the scale isn't there. They have to know the hills and the valleys and get in and out, and it takes more actual physical work. I've always wanted to, one of the other paths I could have taken in life is I really, really wanted to make little robots that took care of the farm, that took care of all of the fields, that they would, they would sample the soil, they would plant the seeds, they would give them the exact nutrients where the seeds are, they would go water the plants if they were dry, they would take care of them, but the little robots would need a lot of care too. The farmer would still have to go out to the field, he'd have to bring supplies to the field, because they'd only cover an acre or so. So the farmer wouldn't have all these huge amounts of, $200,000 combines and stuff they have to take care of. They just have a bunch of little robots they have to take care of. I've wanted to do that. Nobody's done it yet.
It might be the next Google driverless car. Should be
the Roomba for your farm.
Just after once, I want to make sure I'm mindful of your time and everyone else's time. So.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Thank you so much for everything. It's great information. I'm sure if you follow your schedule like between now and start of the weekend. But.
Pretty open. I'm a little behind an email, but an hour or two this afternoon. But other than that, yeah, I'll be sitting around here.
You sticking around for startup weekend?
Yeah, I'm giving.
For the weekend or just tonight?
So I wanted to. I have my nieces. I'm a godparent. First birthdays. They're twins. It's tomorrow night, so I have to be home for that. We've always tried to put family first.
You're doing the opening talk, is that right?
Yep.
7 or something tonight? So if you want
Yep.
to
Some of this might be a repeat then, but we'll see. It's only 15 minutes.
appreciate it.
Thank you.